The check was for $5 million, and Marlene Tice held it up by one corner like something she'd found behind a refrigerator. "I want you to know," she said loud enough for the whole lobby, "that I looked you up." Wade Coyle didn't move. "Fayette County, 2003. She was reading off her own screen now. "26 months. So no. I'm not depositing this, and I'd like you to leave." There were 14 people in that branch. One of them was 10 years old holding a sketchbook and did not know a single thing about Fayette County or 2003 or 26 months because her father had never told her. Sadie Coyle looked up at her dad. And Wade Coyle, 44 years old, 19 years sober, sole owner of a company with 206 employees, stood at a teller counter on Beaumont Road and watched his daughter find out who he used to be from a stranger. Then Marlene Tice tore the check in half and again and let it fall. Then she called the police. 4 minutes later, the front door opened and a man in a gray topcoat walked in carrying a folder he had driven 90 miles to deliver, and he stopped and he said, "Mr. Coyle, sir, are you all right?" He wasn't, not remotely, but not for any of the reasons anyone in that room would have guessed. Wade Coyle was 22 years old the night he sat in a running car outside a pharmacy in Uniontown, while 2 other men went inside. He wants that stated plainly, and every version of this story that softens it makes him angry. So here it is, plainly. He was not a bystander. He was not framed. He knew exactly what was happening. He was addicted to oxycodone, which he had started taking legally in 2001 after a scaffold plank gave out under him on a job in Morgantown and dropped him 19 feet onto a concrete slab, and which he had continued taking illegally after the prescription stopped, the way about 2 million other people in that part of the country did in that exact decade. He drove. That's the whole crime. He drove the car, and he got 26 months, and he served 19 of them. He came out at 25 with no license, no money, a bad back, and a felony conviction that meant that of the 4 things he knew how to do, 3 of them were now closed to him. He got sober in the 9th month inside, which is a thing that happens less often than movies suggest, and he stayed sober, which is a thing that happens much less often than that. 19 years, 3 months. He does not talk about it. He goes to a meeting on Wednesdays in the basement of a Lutheran church, and has for so long that he now makes the coffee. Here is how he got rich, and it is the least glamorous story in this entire series. Nobody would hire him. That's how it started. He applied at 41 places in 11 months, and the box on the form did what the box does. So in 2007, he bought a used trailer and a compressor at auction for $300, and started doing the work that nobody else wanted, which was asbestos abatement in Rust Belt buildings that were coming down. It is filthy dangerous, heavily regulated, and profoundly unsexy, and the reason it pays is precisely that no MBA has ever woken up wanting to do it. He got his certifications. He got a second trailer. In 2011, he hired his first employee, a man named Deacon Pratt, who had done 4 years for aggravated assault, and who could not get anyone to look at him either, and who is now Coyle Environmental's operations director and owns a house. By 2025, Coyle Environmental had 206 employees across Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia, and roughly a third of them had a record. That is not a charity program. Wade will correct you sharply if you call it one. It's a hiring strategy, and it works, and he can show you the retention numbers, which are roughly double the industry average for the reason you'd expect when a man has been told no. 41 times he does not quit a job that said yes. In March, a private infrastructure fund out of Philadelphia bought 30% of Coyle Environmental. The second tranche cleared on a Thursday in October. $5 million, $1 million into a trust for Sadie. $4 million into a thing he had been designing for 6 years with a lawyer, and had never once mentioned publicly a surety bonding fund. Because here is a fact, almost nobody outside the trades knows, a huge amount of construction work requires the contractor to be bonded, and surety companies will not bond a man with a felony. And so a person can get sober, get certified, get good, and still hit a ceiling made of paperwork at exactly the moment he tries to work for himself. Wade had hit that ceiling in 2009. It had taken him 3 years to get around it. The fund would guarantee bonds for people with records who were trying to start their own crews. He'd named it after nobody. He'd called it the Second Trailer Fund, which is a joke that only about 200 people on Earth would understand. Sadie Coyle was 10. Her mother had gone to Arizona when Sadie was 3 and called on holidays, and sometimes not. Sadie had processed this the way kids do, which is by not processing it and instead becoming extremely competent at things. She drew hands. That was the whole hobby, and she was serious about it in a way that unnerved adults. She had a sketchbook, and she filled it with hands. Her father's hands, which have a scar across 2 knuckles and a nail that never grew back right. Deacon Pratt's hands. The hands of the woman at the deli. She had explained her reasoning exactly once at 8 at a parent-teacher conference to a teacher who'd asked why she never drew faces. Faces are what people do on purpose, Sadie said. Hands are just what they've been doing. Wade had thought about that sentence for 2 years. Sadie did not know about Fayette County. This is the fact the entire story runs on, so let's be honest about it, including the part that isn't flattering. He had planned to tell her. He had planned to tell her at 15, which was the number he'd landed on around the time she turned 6, and which he had defended to his sponsor and to Deacon and to himself, with a set of reasons that were about 80% sound. The other 20% was that he was afraid. Not of her judgment. Of a much more specific thing, that there would be a moment, one single moment, and he would see it where his daughter looked at him, and the picture reorganized. He had built 19 years on being, to that one person, a completely uncomplicated man. He knew he was going to have to hand that in eventually. He had been finding reasons to not do it on a Tuesday for 4 years running. That Thursday in October was a Thursday. School had a half day. The plan was bank, then the good hardware store in Connellsville, because Sadie wanted a specific kind of pencil sharpener, then home. He figured the bank would take 10 minutes. Marlene Tice had run the Beaumont Road branch for 9 years, and she was very good at it. And on the day this happened, she had 4 months left before Harrogate Savings closed it, and she did not know that yet. She was 52. She'd grown up in Stillwater Bend, gone to the same high school as half her customers, and knew without looking which of them were 3 days from an overdraft. In 9 years, she had personally waived somewhere north of $40,000 in fees for people she could tell were drowning most of it, unlogged some of it against policy. That is a true fact about her, and it stays true through everything that follows. She had one son. His name was Dallas. He was 31, and she had not spoken to him in 4 years. Dallas Tice had gotten hurt at 19, a knee playing nothing important and ordinary surgery, and had come out of it with a prescription, and the prescription had gone the way those prescriptions went in that county in those years, which is to say, it had eaten him. He had stolen from her twice. The second time was her mother's ring, which he pawned in Uniontown for $400, and which she got back 11 days later by paying $600 and never told him. He'd been to Cambridge Springs, and to a program in Erie, and to a program in Ohio. He had been clean for periods measured in months. He had called her in 2021 from a number she didn't know, and she had let it go to voicemail, and she had listened to that voicemail 11 seconds. Just her name and mom. It's me. Hey, it's me. Probably 400 times, and had never called back because the last 2 times she had, it had cost her something she couldn't afford to lose again. So she had built a wall. And the wall had a shape. Every single day, Marlene Tice walked into a branch in a town that had been hollowed out by exactly one thing, and she saw men in their 40s with wrecked hands and bad backs and cash they couldn't explain, and she felt something rise in her that she would have identified honestly and completely wrongly as professional judgment. It wasn't. It was grief with nowhere to go. She had spent 4 years being unable to protect herself from one man, and she had become extremely aggressively good at protecting a bank from everyone who resembled him. 2 other people in the branch that afternoon. Brody Nance, 23 teller 11 months in, who wanted very badly to be promoted, and who had learned in 11 months that the fastest way to be liked by Marlene Tice was to agree with her quickly. And Yolanda Pierce, 71 third in line there to deposit a $312 check from a dead sister's estate. Yolanda Pierce had been a Fayette County probation officer for 29 years. She had carried a caseload that peaked at 94. She had in 2003 and 2004 and 2005 been assigned a 25-year-old named Wade Coyle, and she had sat across a desk from him every 2 weeks for 18 months, and she had written in his file in March of 2005, a sentence she still remembered writing because it was the kind of thing you don't write often. Subject is doing the work. Recommend early termination of supervision. She had not seen him in 19 years. She recognized him from behind at the rope line from the way he stood. The branch closed at 4:30. Wade and Sadie came through the door at 2:51. Sadie drew the whole time they waited, which took 11 minutes for a line of 3 people. She was working on the hands of the man ahead of them, a farmer's hands, thick fingers, a wedding ring worn down to a wire, and she was working fast because he'd move soon. "Dad, hold still a second." "I'm not doing anything. You're doing the thumb thing." Wade looked down at his own hand on the counter rail. He was, in fact, rubbing his thumb across the pad of his index finger, which was a thing he'd done for 19 years in rooms he didn't love, and which he had never once noticed, and his daughter had catalogued by the time she was 7. He stopped. "Better," Sadie said. At 3:02, Brody Nance waved them forward. Wade put the check on the counter face up along with his driver's license and a folder with the purchase agreement, the wire advice from the fund's bank, and a letter from his own CPA. Because he was not stupid, and he had been carrying documentation his entire adult life, and he had learned at 25 that a man like him shows up overprepared or he doesn't show up. "Depositing this into the Coyle Environmental Operating Account," he said. "Account's been here since 2009. There's a lot of zeros on it, so I brought everything." Brody Nance looked at the check. His face did the thing a 23-year-old's face does, and he said, 1 second, sir," and he went and got Marlene Tice, which was correct. That is the procedure. Brody Nance did his job correctly at 3:02 in the afternoon, and he would spend a long time afterward wishing he had done it slower. Marlene came out. She looked at the check. Then at Wade Coyle Carhartt vest over a hoodie forearms, the hands the boots with the toe caps worn silver, a 10-year-old with a sketchbook. Then out the window at the truck. A 2013 F-35. O with a utility body and Coyle Environmental on the door in vinyl letters that were starting to peel at the corner. 4 seconds. Where did this come from? Not let me pull the account, not let me call the issuing bank. Where did this come from? Wade opened the folder and started laying it out 1 page at a time the way you'd deal cards. Purchase agreement page 1 and the signature page. That's Redstone Infrastructure Partners, Philadelphia. Wire advice this morning, 8:04. Letter from my accountant with her license number and her cell on it. She's expecting a call. She told me to tell you that. My license. My EIN. And that's the account opened October of 2009. And if you pull it up, you'll see a payroll of 206 people running out of it twice a month. He said all of it in a completely level voice. Marlene Tice looked at the papers without picking any of them up. "This is a very large instrument for a company I've never heard of." "That's most companies," Wade said. "Not sharp, just true. What is it you do?" "Abatement, asbestos lead mold, demolition prep." "And someone paid you $5 million for that." "Someone paid me a lot more than that for 30% of it," Wade said. "This is the second half of the second payment." Behind him, third in line, Yolanda Pierce shifted her purse to her other arm and did not say anything yet. At 3:07, Marlene Tice went back to her terminal and typed for about 40 seconds. She would testify later that she was reviewing the account. The forensic pull of her workstation showed that what she actually did was open a browser and run a search on the name Wade Coyle, Fayette County, which returned as the second result a 2003 court docket because that is how the internet works and has worked for 20 years. She read it. Then she came back to the counter. And here is where a bad afternoon became a career-ending one, and it did not have to. She had, at that moment, a complete and lawful path available. Call the issuing bank, confirm the funds, deposit the check, and never say another word to anyone about anything she'd read. She had also, at that moment, a son she hadn't spoken to in 4 years, and a man in front of her who looked like him at 44, holding more money than she would see in 10 lifetimes. "Mr. Coyle." Her voice had changed. It had gotten certain. "I want you to know that I looked you up." Wade went very still. He has said since that he knew in that half second exactly the shape of everything that was coming, that he could see all of it the whole afternoon laid out like a job site before you start. And that the only thought in his head, the only one was, not in front of her. Please, anything else. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "can we step into your office?" "No." "Ma'am. Fayette County, 2003. She was reading it off her own screen out loud in a lobby with 14 people in it. "Burglary 3rd degree, possession, 26 months. The room went silent in a way that a room only goes once. Sadie Coyle stopped drawing. She didn't look up right away. That's the detail Yolanda Pierce couldn't get out of her head afterward, that the girl's hand stopped on the paper, and she stayed exactly where she was for a second, and then she looked up at her father. Wade Coyle was not looking at Marlene Tice. He was looking down at his daughter and his face, according to 4 separate witness statements, and one very clear camera did something that none of them had words for. Brody Nance, 23, who had been agreeing quickly with Marlene Tice for 11 months, said, "Marlene, go to your window." Yolanda Pierce stepped out of line. She was 71 and 4'11", and she walked up to that counter with a $312 check in her hand. "Ma'am," she said, "my name is Yolanda Pierce. I was a probation officer in Fayette County for 29 years. She put her purse on the counter. "I supervised that man for 18 months. In 2005, I wrote a recommendation for early termination of his supervision, which I did 4 times in 29 years. Marlene Tice said, "This is a private transaction." "It stopped being private when you read a court docket out loud to a lobby," Yolanda said. "I've got standing to talk about it because I'm the one who filed the paperwork." She turned slightly to Wade. "Hello, Wade." And Wade Coyle, who had not taken his eyes off his daughter in 90 seconds, said, "Hello, Miss Pierce," in a voice that was not level anymore. That's it. That's the only crack the whole afternoon. 2 words in a different voice. Marlene Tice heard it as escalation. There were 14 people in the Beaumont Road branch when Marlene Tice read a court docket out loud. 8 of them had phones up within 20 seconds. That number comes from the camera, not from anyone's memory, because everyone's memory of it turned out to be generous to themselves. Nobody said anything except a 71-year-old woman. It's worth stopping on that because it's the actual subject of this story, and it gets skipped every time. There was a man near the deposit slips, mid-40s work boots, a Steelers hoodie. A man who by every visible marker was the same man as Wade Coyle, and he filmed the whole thing and did not open his mouth. He'd later post the clip with a caption about how disgusting it was. He got 11,000 likes. There was a woman with a toddler on her hip who turned so the kid couldn't see, which is a decent instinct, and then stayed. There was a man in a golf shirt who said quietly to nobody, "Well, if he's got a record," and then didn't finish the sentence because he didn't need to, because everybody in earshot completed it for him. And there was a 19-year-old named Casey Doyle, no relation to anybody, just a kid with a summer job paycheck who took 1 step forward, actually took a step, and then didn't take another one. Casey Doyle is the one who wrote to Wade Coyle 4 months later. 1 paragraph. It said, "I moved my foot and then I stopped and I don't know why, and I've thought about it every day since." Wade wrote back 3 sentences, and the middle one was, "You're the only person from that room who told me the truth about themselves." Here's the thing about the 8 phones. Every single person holding one believed sincerely that they were doing something. That's the psychology of it, and it's worth naming because it's going to be you someday. Filming feels like intervention. It has the posture of intervention. You're facing the problem, you're taking action, you're creating a record. It even produces a result. That clip is the reason Marlene Tice lost her license. But it costs nothing. That's the tell. Anything that feels like courage and costs nothing is something else wearing courage's coat. And there is a specific price to it that nobody in that lobby paid, and Wade Coyle paid instead, which is that a 10-year-old had to hear the sentence twice, once from the manager, and then 11,000 times from the internet in a clip forever, under a caption written by a man in a Steelers hoodie, who was standing 8 feet away, and could have said, "Hey, that's enough for free." Sadie Coyle is 12 now. The clip is still up. It will be up when she's 30. That's not Marlene Tice's doing. That one belongs to the 14. At 3:11, with the docket still on the screen behind her, Wade Coyle tried one more time. He put both hands flat on the counter, palms down, fingers spread, an old habit from an old room, and he said, "Ma'am, I'm going to say one thing and then I'll stop. You're right about the file, every line of it. I'm not going to stand here and tell you it was somebody else or it was a misunderstanding, because it wasn't, and I've spent 19 years around men who do that, and I promised myself I'd never be one. But you didn't call the issuing bank. You didn't pull my account. You had 4 documents in front of you with 3 phone numbers on them, and you went to a search engine instead." He kept his voice completely level. "So whatever this is, it isn't fraud prevention. Fraud prevention would have taken 2 minutes and I handed you the number. I'd like you to give me the check back and I'll go to Connellsville and we'll both have a normal afternoon." Marlene Tice looked at him, and in the 11 seconds she took to answer, which is a long time in a silent room. Yolanda Pierce would say, she watched a woman get offered a door and choose not to walk through it. Not out of malice exactly, but because walking through it would have required her to look at why she'd typed his name into a search bar in the first place. And there was a voicemail on her phone that she was not that afternoon capable of hearing. "Men in your situation," Marlene Tice said, "don't walk in here with $5 million. I'm not able to accept this instrument." "Then give it back," Wade said. He put his hand out. And Marlene Tice, who was 52, who had waived $40,000 in fees for drowning people who had a voicemail on her phone. She'd listened to 400 times, who was 4 months from losing a branch she'd given 9 years to and didn't know. It looked at a man who reminded her of her son and did the thing. "Men in your situation," she said, "don't walk in here with $5 million. She tore it, twice, and opened her hand. The pieces went down onto the tile, and one of them slid under the rope stanchion. Sadie moved to get it. "Sadie." Wade caught her by the shoulder gently and brought her back. "No. Leave it." "But it's paper. It's not worth anything on its own. They'll print another one." He crouched down in front of her right there with 14 people watching and 8 phones up. "Hey, look at me. Not at her. At me." She looked at him. Everything she said is true. Wade Coyle said to his 10-year-old daughter on the floor of a bank on Beaumont Road. "All of it. It happened before you were born, and I was going to tell you when you were older, and I got it wrong. And I'm sorry you found out like this, and we are going to talk about all of it in the truck, and I'm going to answer every single question you have. Everyone. Okay." Sadie's chin was going. "Okay," she said. "You're not in trouble and I'm not in trouble. We're going to walk out." "Okay." He stood up. Marlene Tice picked up the phone and called 911 and reported an attempted fraud in progress by a male subject who was refusing to leave, and who, she told the dispatcher, has a record. He's a convicted felon. I have it in front of me. The recording of that call is 1 minute and 38 seconds long. It was played twice at a hearing. The word felon appears in it 4 times. The word check appears once. The security guard's name was Ike Salazar, and he was 63, and he had been standing by the door for the entire thing with his hands folded in front of him. Marlene told him to walk Wade out. Ike Salazar walked over. He did not put a hand on him. He stood next to him, beside, not behind, and said, "Sir, let's you and me go outside." And then he walked with him at his shoulder to the door. He held it open. He held it for Sadie, too. Then he stepped outside with them and let it close behind him, and he stood in the parking lot with a man he'd never met and said, "For what it's worth, that was the ugliest thing I've seen in this building." Wade said, "Thank you. You want me to stay out here till the police come?" "So there's somebody." And Wade Coyle said, "Yeah, I'd appreciate that." That is the second best thing anybody did that day, and it cost Ike Salazar his job for 11 days before he got it back with back pay. The police came at 3:19. It took 9 minutes. It was handled fine. 2 officers, one of whom recognized the truck because Coyle Environmental had done the abatement on his mother-in-law's basement in 2022, which is a thing that happens in a town of 9,000. But Wade Coyle spent all 9 of those minutes standing in a parking lot with his hands visible and his daughter's hand in his. And when it was over, he put her in the truck and shut the door and stood outside it for about 15 seconds with his hand on the roof, breathing before he got in. Here is the low point. It isn't the tearing and it isn't the police. It's the next 11 minutes in the cab of an F350 in the parking lot of a Harrogate Savings on Beaumont Road with the engine off. "Ask me anything," Wade said. "I mean it. Anything you want, and I'll tell you the true answer, even if it's bad." Sadie sat with the sketchbook closed on her knees. "Were you in jail?" "Prison. 19 months. There's a difference, and it doesn't matter." "For stealing." "I drove the car. 2 guys I knew broke into a drugstore, and I sat outside in the car and drove them away after." "So yes, for stealing. I didn't go in the building, but that doesn't make it not me." "Why did you do it?" And this is the part Wade had been rehearsing for 4 years in his head, and had never once gotten right, and he did not get it right in the truck either, but he told the truth, which turned out to be enough. "Because I was taking pills and I couldn't stop, and by then I would have done almost anything to keep taking them. That's the honest answer. It's not a good reason. It's just the reason. Because of your back. That's how it started." Sadie looked out the windshield for a while. "Is that why you don't drink at Deacon's Cookout?" "Yeah." "Is that why we go to church on Wednesday and not Sunday?" Wade laughed once and it came out wrong and wet. Yeah, that's why. She thought about it. Then she said the thing that took the legs out from under him, and it was not accusation, and that's what made it unsurvivable. So everybody knew except me. Wade Coyle put both hands on the steering wheel. Yeah, he said. That's right. And that one's not the pills, and it's not 2003. That one's just me being scared for 4 years in a row. He turned and looked at her. That was mine. I'm not going to dress it up. Sadie nodded slowly. She opened the sketchbook and turned to the page she'd been working on and looked at it for a second, and then she turned to a fresh page and started drawing. What are you doing? Her hands, Sadie said. Wade looked over. She was drawing a woman's hands tearing a piece of paper. She had the tendons right. She was 10, and she had the tendons right, and she was drawing it in a parking lot 40 minutes after it happened, and Wade Coyle understood that he was watching his daughter do the exact thing he did. Take the worst hour of a week and put it somewhere. It could be worked on, and that she had learned it from him, and that he did not know whether to be proud or sick about it. Sadie. What? You okay? She kept drawing. I don't know yet, she said. Probably. Sir Vernon Hobbs had driven 90 miles that morning from Harrisburg, and he was in a bad mood about it because he was carrying a folder he did not want to carry. He was 61, a regional vice president for Harrogate Savings, and the folder contained the branch consolidation plan. Beaumont Road was closing in February. 9 years of Marlene Tice's work, $40,000 of unlogged waived fees, and a lobby full of people who had nowhere else within 22 miles to cash a check. All of it was being folded into a branch in Connellsville because the numbers said so, and Vernon Hobbs had come in person because he decided 9 years ago that he would never do this one over the phone. He arrived at 3:23. He walked in and found 8 people still holding phones, 4 pieces of paper on the floor, a teller crying at the second window, a 71-year-old woman sitting in a customer chair with her arms crossed, refusing to leave until she'd talked to somebody, and no security guard, because the security guard was outside standing next to a man in the parking lot. And through the glass, 40 feet away, in a truck with Coyle Environmental on the door. Vernon Hobbs had been in a conference room with Wade Coyle 6 weeks earlier in Philadelphia at the closing of the Redstone transaction, because Harrogate Savings held the depository relationship for Coyle Environmental, and had for 16 years, and because Vernon Hobbs personally signed off on their credit facility, which at that time stood at $11 million. He looked at the pieces on the floor. He crouched down 61 years old bad hip and picked one up and turned it over and read the amount. Then he went outside. He walked across the parking lot to the driver's side of an F350, and the window came down and Vernon Hobbs said, "Mr. Coyle, sir, are you all right?" Wade Coyle said, "No." He didn't say anything else. He didn't have to. Vernon Hobbs looked past him at the 10-year-old in the passenger seat with a sketchbook on her knees and her eyes red, and something in his face closed like a fist. "Give me 20 minutes, he said. "Take whatever you need," Wade said. "I'm going to sit here with my daughter." Marlene Tice was standing behind the counter when Vernon Hobbs came back in. She started to explain. She got about 9 words in. I stopped what I believed was a fraudulent, and Vernon Hobbs raised one hand not sharply and said, "Marlene, do you know who that is?" "I know exactly who that is. I have his docket on my screen." "That's an $11 million credit facility that I personally signed," Vernon Hobbs said. "That's a 16-year depository relationship. That is the second largest commercial account in this region, and you tore up his check and read his criminal record out loud in front of his kid." The lobby heard all of it. Marlene Tice said, "He's a convicted felon." "He's a customer," Vernon Hobbs said. "And a man's conviction is not a thing you disclose in a lobby, and I promise you that the next 4 people who explain that to you are going to be lawyers." The video went up that night, a 41-second clip, and it did what those clips do. But the video is not what ended Marlene Tice, and this is the part that matters, because the video only showed a woman being cruel, and cruelty, unfortunately, is survivable. What ended her were 3 things she did herself in the space of 12 minutes. 1. She ran an unauthorized search on a customer and used the result as the basis for a service decision. Harrogate policy prohibits it. Federal guidance around it is not ambiguous. There is no version where that survives review. 2. She disclosed it, publicly, in a lobby, to 14 people including a minor child. That single act converted a bad judgment call into a legal exposure with 4 different names, and it is the reason Harrogate's outside counsel spent 7 months on this instead of 9 days. 3. The 911 call. 4 uses of the word felon and 1 use of the word check on a recorded line in a report that a district attorney would later characterize carefully as not consistent with the facts as they were known to the caller at the time. She did not lose her job because a powerful man walked in. She lost it because in 12 minutes she generated a complete evidentiary record against herself and handed it to the state, and there was nothing in it anyone could argue with. She was terminated the following Monday. Brody Nance was suspended and reinstated. He gave a statement that included the sentence, "I said her name and then I went back to my window," and he has never let himself off the hook for it, and he still works there. Ike Salazar was suspended for leaving his post and reinstated 11 days later with back pay after Vernon Hobbs read the incident report and asked out loud in a conference room in Harrisburg. He left his post to go stand with the customer, give the man a raise. Yolanda Pierce gave 4 hours of statements to 3 different sets of lawyers and refused to be interviewed by any news outlet. She told one reporter, "I did 29 years of this. He's not the story. The story is that I was the only person in the room who had a reason to be sure, and everybody else needed a reason." The lawyers came Tuesday. The number was enormous. It came with a public apology, an NDA, and the assumption that the credit facility would roll as scheduled. Wade Coyle listened to all of it at his kitchen table with Deacon Pratt sitting next to him because Deacon had insisted. And then he said, "I don't want money, and I'm not signing anything that says my kid can't talk about the worst day of her life." He gave them 2 conditions, only 2 because he'd sat up until 1 in the morning cutting a list of 9. 1. Harrogate stops it. In writing published applying to every branch, criminal history is not a permitted input in any deposit account, opening or service decision full stop, and any employee who runs one is out. Not reviewed. Out. He wanted the language specific because he'd read the vague version of it before in 2009 at a different bank in a policy that hadn't stopped anything. 2. And this is the one nobody in that kitchen saw coming, including Deacon Pratt, who said Wade out loud in a tone, "Keep the branch open." The lawyers looked at each other. "You're closing Beaumont Road in February," Wade said. "I saw the folder on the counter. Vernon left it there." "That's Mr. Coyle. That's a separate business decision that predates." "I know it does. That's why I'm asking." He leaned forward. "There are 9,000 people in this town, and the next branch is 22 miles the other side of a mountain, and about a third of the men on my crews cannot get a job without a bank account, and cannot get a bank account without a branch they can physically walk into because they don't have a driver's license yet, because they just got out. That's not theoretical. That's my hiring pipeline." He tapped the table. "You want to make this right, don't pay me. Keep the door open. I'll cover the operating gap for 5 years and you can put that in writing too." Harrogate agreed to both. The Beaumont Road branch is still open. Wade Coyle has never once set foot in it since. She did not become a monster in the public imagination. She became something worse, which is a clip. 41 seconds. Her face, her voice reading a docket number out loud, a 10-year-old's head turning. It ran on 3 national programs. It was captioned in 11 languages. People made it into a reaction image. Almost nobody learned that she'd waived $40,000 in fees for people who were drowning. That's not a defense. It's just true, and it's the thing that makes her a person instead of a villain, and it disappeared completely because 41 seconds has no room in it. She lost her banking license 14 months later. She pled to a summary offense on the false report. She was named in a civil action, and it settled, and the settlement was small because she did not have anything. She moved in with her sister in Belle Vernon. And 9 weeks after that, this is documented, it came out in the civil discovery, and Wade Coyle did not know about it until a lawyer put the page in front of him. Marlene Tice wrote a letter, not to Wade, to Sadie. It was 1 page. It did not ask for anything, and it did not explain anything, and it did not use the words, "I'm sorry I lost my job." It said roughly that she had said a true thing in a cruel way to hurt a man, and that she had known there was a child there, and had done it anyway, and that she had spent 30 years telling herself that the thing she could not forgive in her own son was the stealing, and had figured out at 52 in her sister's spare room that it had never been the stealing. The last line was, "I hope you draw your father's hands for a very long time." She sent it to the lawyers. She asked them to decide whether to pass it on. They gave it to Wade. Wade sat with it for 6 weeks. Then he gave it to Sadie because he had made exactly one promise in a truck in a parking lot, and it was to stop deciding what she could handle. Sadie read it twice. Do I have to write back? No. Do you want me to? That's not mine, Wade said. That one's yours. She didn't write back. She put it in the back of the sketchbook, which is where it still is. It's a Tuesday 22 months later at the Beaumont Road branch that is still open. Sadie is 12. She's in the truck doing homework because she has stopped going in and Wade has stopped asking her to. A young man comes through the door at 11:40 with a payroll stub and a state ID and no driver's license because he is 9 weeks out of Cambridge Springs and hasn't gotten it back yet, and he needs an account because his employer does not cut paper checks. The teller Brody Nance, 25, now still there promoted, takes the stub and looks at it. Coyle Environmental Abatement Division. Gross $1,462.40. He looks at the name on the ID. Brody Nance says nothing about anything. He opens the account. It takes 11 minutes. He tells him about the overdraft protection and the young man says no thank you twice in a way that suggests he's given it real thought. Wade Coyle knew. That's the part. He'd known for 5 months since the day his HR director sent up the new hire list for the Uniontown crew, and he'd seen the surname and stopped scrolling. He'd sat with it for a week. He'd called Deacon Pratt at 10 at night about it, which he does maybe twice a year. You want me to tell you it's fine, Deacon had said. I want you to tell me what you do. Wade, I'd hire him and I wouldn't say one word to anybody ever, and neither will you, because you've never in 18 years told me one single thing about anybody's paperwork, and I've never asked. So he approved the hire and said nothing. He has never met Dallas Tice. Coyle Environmental has 206 employees. He does not meet most of them, and he specifically arranged quietly to never be on that crew's site, which is the only special treatment Dallas Tice has ever received, and it was designed to be invisible. He did not do it for Marlene Tice. He wants that clear too. He has never forgiven her exactly. He'd say the word doesn't fit, that it implies a transaction that never happened. And he has never spoken to her, and he does not intend to. He did it because a man with a felony and 9 weeks clean applied for a job doing work nobody wants. And that is the entire and only qualification his company has ever asked for. And to make an exception for that particular last name would have been to let a woman on Beaumont Road change what his company was. That's it. That's the whole reason. It's less noble than it looks, and he'd tell you so. Sadie asked about it exactly once that Tuesday when Dallas Tice came out of the branch and got into a car, and Wade watched him in the mirror a half-second too long, and his daughter, who has been reading his hands since she was 7, caught it. Who's that? Wade thought about the promise he made in a parking lot. That's the son of the woman from the bank. Sadie turned all the way around in her seat. He works for you. Yeah. Did you know? Yeah. Does she know? I don't have any idea, Wade said. I've never told anybody and I'm not going to, and now you know, which makes 2 of us, and it stays there. Sadie sat with that for a while. She's 12. She takes a while. Then she said, why? And Wade Coyle, 46, 19 years and 11 months, said the truest thing he had. Because when I was 25, 41 places said no to me, and one guy said yes, and I don't actually know why he did. I've thought about it for 20 years. He shrugged. I figure the only thing I can do with that is be the one guy sometimes and not ask a lot of questions about it. Sadie opened her sketchbook. Somewhere in the middle of it, between 400 pairs of hands, there is a drawing of a woman's hands tearing a piece of paper. Tendons correct, done in a parking lot by a 10-year-old 40 minutes after the worst hour of her life. She has never taken it out. She says it's the best thing she's ever drawn, and that it's the only one she'd never sell. And when people ask her why, and they do, because she's good, now she's very good, she says the same thing every time. Because you can't tell from the hands what she was doing it for. That's the whole thing. That's the entire story in one sentence, and it took a 10-year-old to say it. You can't tell from the hands. Not hers. Not his. Not the guy in line behind you. Not the woman at the counter. Not the man in the truck with the peeling vinyl letters, and the 20-year-old docket, and a check in his pocket for $5 million. You can't tell. So you're going to have to ask.